Great. Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. This is one of the joint projects we have between MEDA and Legal Services for Entrepreneurs. So MEDA has been supporting businesses since 1973, especially in the Mission District. And during the pandemic, we've been working with different partners, including the city, to provide different type of services to small businesses, and most important, financial assistance through mini grants programs, and lately through the SF Help program, which is a loan program. It's a joint project with the city, zero interest rate, and it is a very flexible conditions for those loans. So our goal is to support as much as we can to small businesses to overcome this pandemic. And so we will continue offering technical assistance to small businesses during this pandemic and beyond the pandemic. Thank you again for attending, and thank you, Tobias.
Thank you very much, Edwin, and thank you very much to Meta for partnering with us to put on this webinar. My name is Tobias Damlour. I'm the staff attorney for Legal Services for Entrepreneurs at Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights of the San Francisco Bay Area. Legal Services for Entrepreneurs started in 1997, providing direct legal services to small businesses, particularly in low-income communities of color, and primarily via volunteer attorneys who work for in-house legal departments or law firms. We provide webinars, workshops, brief legal advising sessions, and longer-term assistance. And I have a few slides to show about our program. I'm just going to share my screen here. So to find out more about our webinars, you can check our calendar at this link here, and I'll be distributing a copy of the slides to all of the participants. And we also have 1-hour consultations, as I said. They're with volunteer attorneys and via phone or video chat as you prefer. And they include a review of your small business legal documents before the consultations. Longer-term assistance consists of advising and assistance by volunteer attorneys for specific requests over several weeks or months, and also during the pandemic via phone or video chat. Our legal advising to small businesses covers entity choice and formation, contract drafting and review, commercial lease review and negotiation, employment law, intellectual property, and you can sign up for these services at the links here in the slides, again, which I'll distribute at the end of the presentation. So before we start the presentation, I first wanted to introduce our volunteer presenter, Michael Cole. He's an attorney in the in-house legal department of Gusto, which is a payroll and small business services company. We're really glad to have him join us at this event today, and we're very thankful to you for taking your time to prepare this presentation and present it today, Michael. And I just wanted to give anyone who is a Spanish speaker a chance to ask questions in Spanish, if that's what you prefer, before we start the presentation, which is going to be in English.
Si hay alguien que necesita preguntar algo en español, yo puedo también traducir.
right, it doesn't look like we have any requests. So without further ado, I'd like to give it over to you, Michael.
Great. Thank you, Tobias, and thank you, Edwin, as well, for having me here today. So, as mentioned, my name is Michael Cole. I'm an employment attorney, currently in-house counsel at Gusto, which is a payroll and HR services provider. We focus specifically on supporting small businesses such as yours. I've been a practicing employment attorney my entire career, both litigating and also advising companies of various sizes on compliance with HR and employment law requirements. And so today we're going to talk about various ways to operate safely and how you can prepare to reopen during COVID, and talk through strategically what are the top things or issues that you as small businesses need to know. As I'm sure you all are aware, this is an area that's really fast moving. There's continually new guidance which is coming down, and so we're going to touch on some of those issues as well. But the goal is, for you to walk away from today's webinar with at least an understanding of some of the key issues to be thinking about, and how to operate your business and prepare yourselves as you are reopening. So why don't we dive right in? And Tobias, if we can advance, thank you. So the goals of today's presentation, there are 3 key takeaways that we'd love for all of you to come away with. And we'll review these topics, but of course, provide some time for questions at the end. But also feel free, if you have questions, to type them into the chat function of Zoom. We'll be sure to review the ones we can at the end. Like I said, there will definitely be questions and time for questions at the end. The goal here really is to make this as helpful as possible for all of you. So we do want to make this as interactive as we can, despite this being on Zoom, and we do want to make sure that this is geared towards your particular needs. So again, please feel free to use that chat function. So what are the goals? There are 3 main ones here. One is, we're hoping to give you some practical advice as to, how you can understand to reopen safely during COVID-19. Like, what are the top things that you need to think about in terms of protecting your business and your employees? The second big thing is, how can you protect your business from potential liabilities? That'll cover the gamut of, the health of your business, the health of your employees, as well as the health of the customers that you are serving. And then finally, we're going to provide you with some resources moving forward. Again, as I mentioned, this is really a fast-moving and changing area. So we'll provide you with some key resources so you can keep abreast of changes and guidance that's coming down. So, if I were to distill this into the essence, really the best way to reduce your liability is to follow proper safety protocols. Proper safety protocols in terms of, how you run your business, how you support your customers, how you support your employees. There's a lot of guidance which is out there. A lot of it, really depends on the locality that you're based in. Each of the counties have come down with different guidance as to which businesses can be open, specifically, what sort of protocols you need to follow. But we'll talk at high level as to sort of the key takeaways and things that you should be aware of. Before we get into that, I just wanted to brief everyone on some more recent changes that you definitely need to be aware of. So if you go to the next slide. There are 3 big changes. One is, as I think we're all aware, at the state level, Gavin Newsom announced a new statewide lockdown. The state was organized into 5 main regions. We'll get into the specifics on the next slide, but depending on particular triggers around ICU bed availability, there are requirements under this new state law to shut down. Some states, as localities, as we'll see, have already opted in, even if we haven't met those thresholds. So, here really the key is you should be ready and think about that you might have to close quickly if you haven't had to already. So just, think about what is your business model, can you adjust? Will you be able to adjust under the new statewide lockdown? The other big development here is there were new temporary measures and emergency rules that were put into place by Cal OSHA, which regulates state workplace safety. They went into effect the end of November, beginning of December. It covers a whole host of topics, including plans that you should have in place to ensure worker safety. What are your plans for communicating potential exposures to COVID-19 in the workplace? How are you going to reduce the risk of exposure, including things through masking and social distancing, as well as how are you going to handle risk and mitigate risk if in the event you have an employee who tests positive for COVID-19, how you'll disclose to other employees and address those risks. So wanted to make sure I mentioned that. The third big thing, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the coming slides, is there are also a number of Bay Area counties which have also instituted various rollbacks and have basically brought us back to where we were at the start of the pandemic in terms of lockdowns and shutdowns. Many counties in the Bay Area are opting into the statewide stay-at-home order, even if the triggers have not yet been issued. So next slide, let's talk a little bit about the new California regional stay-at-home order. So as you can see, it went into effect on December 3rd. It's intended to address what we're seeing as an across the state increase in the spread of COVID-19 and surges that we're seeing. It essentially prohibits gatherings of any size, closes down and requires a closing down of many operations and businesses except for critical infrastructure, other certain retail, requires 100% masking and physical distancing. We'll send these slides out after the presentation, but we provided you a link there so you can read more about the regional stay-at-home order, the statewide order. The way it operates is basically California, as I mentioned, has been grouped into 5 regions. The Bay Area is one of those. And depending on certain triggers related to ICU bed availability, as we hit those triggers, areas and regions will need to lock down. In essence, once we hit those triggers, the stay-at-home order will go into effect for the region the day after. Even though the Bay Area, most counties here are above that threshold, some Bay Area counties have already opted in, but not all. We'll talk a little bit that in the next slide. As I mentioned, under the regional stay-at-home order, a lot of businesses are needing to close. Some can stay open. Those that can stay open include things like critical infrastructure, schools, non-urgent medical or dental care, childcare and pre-K, albeit they have to comply with certain precautions and requirements. Other businesses that can stay open, it really depends on industry. So for example, while retail can stay open, under the regional stay-at-home order, there are certain restrictions, including limiting capacity to 20%. Restaurants is another industry example where you can stay open, but only for takeout or delivery, no indoor or outdoor dining. Other operations are required to close. That includes things like salons, personal care services, and bars. To track really whether you should be open or closed, you can continuously keep up to date at the link that we'll provide there. So again, you really need to think about, and being adept at closing quickly if you need to, and how you're going to adjust. If we can go on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, there are certain Bay Area counties that have already opted in, even though we're not necessarily at the thresholds. So the following, as you can see here, have already opted into the state regional stay-at-home order until at least January 4th. That could be extended. Of the Bay Area counties that have opted in, we have Alameda, Contra Costa, Marin, San Francisco, and Santa Clara. And we provided links to you there with the latest on the stay-at-home orders, and includes also information as to specifically which businesses can or can't be open within each county. So far, there are a few other Bay Area counties that have not opted in. That includes San Mateo, Napa, Solano, although they may soon opt in. We've been hearing some word that they may opt in and institute their additional stay-at-home orders. Sonoma is another county that, although they initially didn't opt in, I believe on Saturday just recently opted in. So again, this is just an area you'll need to keep abreast of. You know, again, requirements are going to differ for each county and for each industry. You know, what can be open, mirroring the state law guidance. Some examples of businesses that can remain open are indoor retail, albeit at restrictions as to capacity, restaurants for takeout delivery only. Other examples include outdoor gyms, fitness, but only outdoor only, and again, with certain restrictions. What must close? Some examples include indoor recreation, salons, barbershops, personal care services, bars, and indoor gyms. San Mateo County, as I mentioned, has not currently opted in. This is just an example that I wanted to give. They are, however, currently at the purple tier, which is the most restricted tier in terms of what's open. So again, you'll want to check out those links if you operate within any of these counties. Requirements, again, as they're going to differ for each county, for each industry. The big themes, however, is you're going to want to have in place protocols covering things like screening employees, screening guests, proper cleaning, hygiene, how to contact or trace, and steps you're going to take to close down your business. So if you can go to the next slide. So just wanted to sort of zoom out a little bit, sort of thinking ahead, you know, once we're beyond this current state with lockdowns and we're in a place where you can start to reopen, there's sort of another question you have to ask yourselves and think about, you know, are you going to reopen? And if you do, you know, how do you think about that, sort of the what and the why? And, you know, there's a few different considerations here. Obviously, there's going to be federal and state law guidance around, you know, when you should or should not reopen. So, for example, at the federal level, there's guidance based on, you know, the states and regions that are maintaining a 14-day downward trajectory in cases, looking at factors like, you know, whether or not hospitals can, you know, be open to treat patients without crisis care, you know, wanting to make sure that healthcare workers need to be able to get quick, reliable COVID test results, wanting to make sure that states and regions have systems in place to do things like widespread testing, being able to supply PPE, guarding the safety of essential workers, guidelines for public transit, and conditions for social distancing. You know, California right now is at least as a state that's currently in restricted reopening phase, where you know, some businesses are not allowed to function. We've talked about those on the previous slide. And then, of course, you have to factor in, again, you know, state law guidance and county guidance. California has its own reopening plan. Outside of, you know, the current regional stay-at-home order, there are 4 tiers of restrictions. They move in order from less restrictive to most restrictive. And what we're looking at is 3 key metrics. You know, what is the rate of positive test cases each day per 100K of residents? We're looking at the average percent of tests for COVID-19 that are coming back positive over a 7-day period. And we're also looking at an equity metric to ensure that, you know, positive case numbers in larger counties is not disproportionately affecting poor cities and neighborhoods. And really what it all comes down to is, you know, can we operate businesses in a safe and way? This chart, you know, is an example from Alameda County as to what's risky and less risky. It's a good starting point. And what you'll, you know, find is, you know, as businesses are reopening, it's again going from less risky to most risky based on the tiers and the framework above. So, you know, if we think about businesses that are allowed to reopen first, you know, at the lowest end of the scale, we're talking about businesses where you're operating in outdoor space, where there's limited physical conduct or contact, where there's sort of no shared services. More moderate businesses that would be, you know, generally allowed to reopen next would be those where you might have small outdoor gatherings, where you might have more physical contact, but it's more likely to, you know, be able to implement physical distancing, and where there would be brief minimal contact. and then there's sort of low mixing in the community. You know, higher risk and highest risk, we're talking about small indoor gatherings, businesses with poor ventilation. You know, if there's going to be large outdoor gatherings, things of that nature, there's going to be close physical contact. And then the highest risk is, you know, businesses in which we're talking about large indoor gatherings, crowd conditions. Those are going to be the businesses that would be allowed to open last. You know, and again, you can think about this also even as you're allowed to reopen, like where do you think you as a business fall within this framework? So, you know, you might decide even though you're allowed to reopen, you know, do you feel like it's safe and do you have the right protocols in place to reopen safely? So what are the things that we should think about as reopening safely, and what are the key things to do? So we'll go through that on the next slide. The first thing is, you know, you really should have in place protocols to screen employees. These is going to be required by the new Cal OSHA guidance. It's required by a lot of state county guidelines. This includes things like daily symptom checks, making sure that you're screening employees for whether or not they're exhibiting any of the COVID-19 symptoms. Have they been in situations where they've potentially been exposed to COVID-19, including through things like travel, or they've been in close contact with someone who either has or is suspected to have COVID-19? You know, checking things like temperature as well. There's no requirement that you do the screening on site. You might decide for your business that you'll have employees self-screen at home. There's decisions to be made about whether or not you want to do temperature checks and have employees do temperature checks at home, or if you're going to do that when they show up at work. You know, a lot of this is really common sense, but you'll need to think about how you're going to engage in those screening of employees. The other thing that you're going to want to think about is what are your protocols in place to screen guests? So that's going to include things like making sure you have proper signage in place, making sure, you know, for instance, that you're excluding guests and those and customers who are experiencing symptoms and making sure that they're aware that they're not to enter the business, making sure you have proper signage and displays up around maintaining distance, requiring that guests and also your employees are wearing masks at all appropriate times, reminding folks, again, guests as well as your employees, around proper hygiene, around washing hands, frequent washing of hands, etc. Some businesses, again, you might also consider whether it makes sense and you want to not only have guests self-screen for symptoms, but whether you'll also require temperature checks for your guests before they enter your space as well. The third big thing is think about what your protocols are going to be for proper cleaning and hygiene. And this is obviously going to depend on the type of business that you are. You know, you might have a lot of high touch services or other areas that are highly used. You're going to want to have more frequent cleaning and protocols in place for that. And you'll want to make sure that your employees and guests you know and understand what are proper hygiene techniques. You know, think about things like, do you want to offer sanitizer or other cleanser that's available? Again, that's going to be really geared towards your particular business. And a lot of counties have provided checklists and protocols as you reopen your businesses for things that you want to consider that are geared towards particular industries. The final thing here is really, you know, you should be ready to, at least for your employees, want to understand like how can you contact trace and what are your steps going to be if you need to close your business based on an outbreak. You are obligated with employees to notify them if there is an exposure within the workplace. So you want to have processes and communications in place so that employees understand who to turn to if they have COVID symptoms or if they test positive. And you want to have protocols in place around contact tracing. So being able to quickly understand who, if an employee has tested positive or if they're exhibiting symptoms, who they might have come into close contact with in the workplace, and who else might have been potentially exposed. And then how you're going to go about notifying those individuals so they can take appropriate steps either to quarantine or if they themselves develop symptoms or test positive to isolate as well. You'll need to consider as well disclosures that might be needed to other state agencies too, particularly if you have outbreaks within the workplace too. And then you'll need to think about, again, this will be dependent on your business, whether or not you need to shut down the business entirely for a period of time in order to do things like, deep cleaning. If you have multiple spaces and the exposure was relatively limited, can you only shut down, or can you get away with shutting down part of your business? So you'll need to think about those factors as well as part of your broader strategy for contact tracing and limiting exposure. So some more brass tacks as to things you'll want to have in place. If we can go on to the next slide. You want to have in place a risk assessment, site-specific protection plan. This is something which is now going to be required, again, by Cal State OSHA guidance, but you'll want to have in place a specific site plan that walks through all of your mitigation measures, including the training that you're providing to employees, how you're minimizing exposure, what your communications plan is, how you're going to train employees, steps you're going to take to reduce potential risk of spread, including things like masking and social distancing. The next thing you'll want to really think about and have in place is written documentation around training. Do employees know about monitoring their own symptoms, about observing safety protocols? It's always good guidance here. You want to have it in a written document. You want to have it obvious. You want to be able to disseminate that and employees to have access. And then, think about, again, your protocols for individual control measures and screenings. Are you going to require temperature checks at the workplace? Or are you going to have employees do it at home? How are you going to have employees disclose to you if they're symptomatic or if they've actually tested positive for COVID-19? And then you'll want to think about support for employees specifically who have tested positive or are experiencing symptoms. There are varying requirements at the federal, state, and local level in terms of paid time off that you'll need to provide to employees. And so you want to make sure that they're well aware of what those resources are and paid time off that they can avail themselves of. Think about disinfecting surfaces. What are high touch point areas? How often are you going to clean? Training for employees around personal hygiene, as well as for customers. You want to have in place physical distancing protocols to maintain at least 6 feet distance between employees and between customers. And then you'll need to think through like practical impacts of that. So for example, do you need to change the layout of your store or your business to maintain that? Do you, for example, you need to have certain directional signs in place to sort of guide the flow of traffic and to maintain social distancing? Thinking about ways that you need to interact with customers, barriers that you might need to put in place as well. These are all the things that you'll need to think about. And then you'll need to think through, finally, industry-specific requirements. Again, if you look at some of the state and county-specific resources, depending on the industry you're in, you can look up checklists and things that are particular to your industry and risks that are particularly associated with your industry and steps that you want to take to address those specific concerns. Again, a lot of this is common sense. You want to have this posted in obvious areas for your customers and employees so they understand, they're easy to implement, and they know what's expected of them. So stepping back a notch, let's think about also the bigger picture. How can you think about, broadly, the health of your business, health of your employees, and health of your customers? So in terms of the health of your business, a lot of this is balance, and a lot of this goes into thinking through, do you feel like you can reopen safely in a way, and does it make sense for your business? Obviously fewer customers means less revenue. On the other hand, lack of a safety protocol, may mean that your business could be liable if someone catches COVID at your business. So this is all about, balancing the risks and needs of your particular business to operate and complying with, state and local requirements. Also think through the health of your employees. Liabilities and things that you need to think about is what happens if employees, do get sick and they can't, come to work, or if they have family members that come down sick. Employees, if you don't have proper protocols in place, they themselves can bring claims against, your business for lack of safety and protocols. Employees who are coming in and are sick could also be infecting, your customers, which not only could be, bad for, the business and bottom line, but bad for your brand. So, it does make, sense, of course, to support employees who are sick. As I mentioned, there are various requirements in place at the state and local level in terms of what you would need to provide in terms of legally protected sick leave for employees if they come down sick, or if they're caring for family members who are sick, or if they need to quarantine. And then finally, think about the health of your customers. And again, liabilities here is what happens if a customer catches COVID at your business. Customers might be concerned about safety protocols that you have in place. They might not be comfortable with what you have. They might not come in. Again, this is all going to impact the bottom line of your business and your brand. And so you want to think about those things and gear your protocols in place to basically create an environment where not only your employees but customers are going to feel safe coming in and being able to do business with you. What about the type of business you're in? There are some industry specific considerations. We'll walk through some of those, and again, as I mentioned, take a look at the county and state specific guidance. There's really good protocols and guidance in place for your particular industry. If you're in the food service industry, what are the postings you need to have for customers around hygiene? Same with employees, good hygiene as well. This also, applies to like food preparation. What are you going to do around masking, making sure that you have appropriate social distancing in your kitchens, and also the layout of your store. Retail, think about the layout of the store. How you're going to interact with customers. How you're going to ensure that you can maintain proper social distancing. Are there ways that you can address ingress and egress as customers are coming in and out of your business to maintain appropriate directional flow and ensure proper distancing? How do you want to set up, cash registers, again, to ensure distancing? What barriers do you need to put in place? If you're an office environment, maybe you're going to think through really like what is like absolutely essential and critical, like where do you actually need employees to be in the office to maintain minimum business operations, or can you think about having employees work at home and telework and telecommute? A lot of businesses that are office-based have moved to fully remote. And then if you're going to be fully remote, you need to think about, what are requirements that are essential for the job that you need to support at home. There might be, certain expenses that employees are now incurring at home that they wouldn't otherwise incur when they're in the office. What are you doing to support? And are there certain obligations or areas where you'd want to reimburse or provide employees with stipends, in order to set them up for success? That might include things like, internet access, phone access. Is there other like critical office equipment that they need, such as printers that they don't have access at home? You'll need to think through those things as well. And then just like other industries, services industries, some of these, right now are currently required to be, shut down, like personal care industries. But you'll need to think through some of the things we've already talked about when you do reopen around how you're going to maintain appropriate social distance. What protocols are you going to have in place around proper hygiene and cleaning to reassure your employees as well as your customers that are doing business with you? And again, similar with manufacturing too. What are some other things that you can think about to protect yourself as it relates to these three key groups? And how can you, limit liability in terms of, the health of your business? If your people are hurt and your customers are hurt, the bottom line is your business are hurt. So you're going to want to think of different business insurance. If you don't already have in place, you should have workers' comp. You'll also want to check, there might be relief that's being provided. Went through the round of PPP loans. There currently is negotiation at the federal level around extending potential PPP loans. There might be state relief that's available that could provide relief for you for certain ongoing business costs, such as utilities, rent, your mortgage, relief from interest on your loan and bank fees. And then you'll also need to think about, if you can't weather the storm, or if you need to, again, shut down, or you think you're going to have to pivot your business, what are the things that you're going to do in terms of staffing? Are you going to have to consider things like furloughs, where you keep employees on for a period of time, hoping to rebound? Do you think that you're going to have to lay off employees? You can look at, things like work share programs, where you can avoid layoffs entirely. What are other programs through unemployment insurance that are going to be available? And then think about the health of your employees. Again, what are the personal hygiene protocols you're going to have in place? You want to create an environment where employees are going to feel comfortable coming to you if they're symptomatic and positive, or diagnosed positive with COVID-19, so you can quickly pivot and support employees. You'll need to think through what are the employee policies and incentives you're going to have in place in order to encourage folks not only for legal obligations to take sick time, but what other leave you're going to offer. You want to incentivize employees if they are sick not to come into work, because that's better than coming in with symptoms and possibly infecting others, including your customers. And then think about, other health programs or insurance that you can offer. What are other perks or benefits that you can provide, including more flexible sick time, other benefits or things that you might be able to provide to employees to support them. And with the health of your customers, again, you want to think through protocols to ensure proper hygiene, distancing, et cetera, so that customers feel safe. A lot of this, again, is common sense, but following, key county and city guidance here. So what are some resources for employees and businesses? There's multiple that are out there. For instance, they might have available grant programs for small businesses. We talked a little bit about PPP loans or other grant programs that might be available for small businesses. We'll share out a link at the end of the program for you to work through those resources. There might be tax credits and deferrals that you're eligible for. You'll want to work with your accountant on those if you have one. There are various state programs that have arrived. There are new federal programs that are likely to arrive and come that'll provide you some relief in terms of the form of tax credits and deferrals. There might be other programs in place, for example, waiver of incorporation fees for new businesses. And then there's other support, including through Renew America. The California Social Enterprise Task Force is providing pro bono legal support. They have weekly office hours, Monday and Wednesday. And again, we'll provide links to these various resources that you can avail yourselves of. So before we turn to frequently asked questions, are there any questions from the group or top of mind topics that you all are thinking of that you'd like answered?
I also just wanted to invite everyone to unmute yourselves if you have questions, or type your question into the chat box. Bearing in mind that this is recorded and will be posted publicly.
Michael, I do have a question on one of the topics that you already covered. So, which is, what's the liability for an employer? Let's say, for example, if an X restaurant has 10 employees and one of those employees tested positive, but that particular employee is not in payroll. So what's the liability for the employer in those particular cases in terms of COVID time off or other responsibilities?
Yeah. So when you say you said not on payroll?
That particular employee is not on payroll.
Yeah. So all the requirements, they do apply to employees, not specifically to contractors as well. You do want to think about, is this person, should they be your employee? But, even if there aren't particular requirements like legally in terms of your obligation, you do want to, and this gets to one of the first questions, this is someone that you're still working with and doing business with. So, what are things that you want to do to go above and beyond for that individual? Because regardless, they are in your workplace and interacting with others in the workplace. And so you do want to be able to support and think through you know, the contact tracing, who were they potentially in contact with? Who else do you need to disclose this to, like in your workplace? Can you provide support around time off, making sure that they're not coming into the workplace, at least while they're quarantining. So all the same considerations apply whether you're talking about, you know, a contractor or not, because the bottom line is it's about protecting others in the business, and you know, the virus knows bounds, whether it's an employee that's infected or whether it's a contractor. So yeah, I mean, so, you know, one top question is, do you have to have safety protocols in place for contractors or just your employees? Well, I mean, you know, we just talked about that, but you know, at a broad level, yes, you do need to have safety protocols that are going to apply across the board, not just for employees, but for others that you're doing business with. This isn't just contractors, but also, you know, customers and others that are coming into your workplace, or partners that you're working with. You might not have obligations specifically around disclosure notices or sick leave or benefits that you have to provide, but you do want to think through those things that you do want to provide, you know, again, because you want to, you know, not incentivize folks coming in or frequenting the business if they're ill or if they're sick, because you want to minimize the exposure. What about providing COVID tests at work? So, you know, this is now part of the new OSHA regulations that came down. There is an obligation now to provide resources and let employees know around getting free tests. There are requirements, and we provided the link above, but you should read it in detail around what happens if you have like an outbreak or a major outbreak at work. So if you have multiple employees who have come down with COVID-19 over a certain period of time, there are now new obligations for businesses, not only to provide free testing, but to provide periodic testing on a regular basis over a certain period of time until you're past a period of time from the outbreak. So you might have obligations there, even if legally you don't. Think about ways that you might want to encourage employees to get tested on a regular basis. It's one of our defenses. There's a lot of free testing that's available in San Francisco. So think about ways that you want to encourage employees if they want to get tested. You know, another big question is what happens if employee or contractor tests positive for COVID-19, or they say that they are exhibiting symptoms. What are the things that you should do? We talked a little bit about this earlier, but one of the first things that you should do is obviously you want to support that individual, if it's an employee, in terms of benefits that you're providing and paid time off. You want to make sure that they're not coming into the workplace, that they're excluded from the workplace. If they've tested positive or are presumed to have COVID-19 due to symptoms, there's certain requirements around isolation and how long they need to isolate and when they can come back to the workplace. You know, even if they haven't tested positive or they've just been exposed or have indicated they've been exposed because they've been in close contact with someone, you might want to take steps there to exclude them from the workplace and require them to quarantine. So in addition to excluding them from the workplace, making sure that they stay at home and the benefits and support you're providing, we've talked about as well, you'll want to contact trace who else have they come into contact with in the workplace. You know, again, this comes down to making sure that people are aware and they have the information they need in order to make informed decisions. What about, you know, this, you know, there's a lot of, you know, questions about, you know, reopening. It's confusing, it's changing constantly. You know, how do I keep abreast of this? Is there a penalty? What happens if I don't follow these regulations? So we provided, again, links earlier. Really encourage all of you to read through those depending on, you know, which county you're in. Those are continuously updated. It will give you the most up-to-date information. Again, this is an area that's continually changing, which tiers we're in, how we're locking down, and which businesses are going to reopen. So that's a really great way to, you know, to keep abreast. You know, there could be real penalties if you don't comply. But, you know, I encourage everyone to think less about sort of what is the penalty and do I need to do this, you know, just for legal purposes. Yes, you know, there is the compliance piece, but, you know, what is really the right thing to do? Because again, we're trying to create an environment where people are able to make informed choices, and ultimately where you want your employees and your customers to feel safe. Because aside from any legal requirements, if customers and employees are not going to feel safe, that's going to affect your bottom line and your brand. What about if you're trying to start a new business during COVID? A lot of folks are, some folks are, totally shifting their focus and trying to pivot in terms of their business. Again, it's all the same considerations that you want to think about that we've talked about through this webinar. Again, a really good resource is to look at the state and county level restrictions and the links we provided to see whether or not you're able to open now and what are the various restrictions that are in place that you'll want to think about. All right. Other questions? I see we have 10 minutes left. Happy to answer other questions that are top of mind for folks. Otherwise, then I'll turn it back over to Tobias, who's going to talk about some resources.
I have a question. Do you hear me?
I do, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just interested in, it seems like a lot of information that particularly small businesses have to be aware of, all the different changes, all the different regulations. It seems confusing, but I'm just wondering, have there been penalties for non-compliance? What do these penalties look like, or what are the top penalties to avoid, or particularly for small businesses?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's going to depend on your industry. I have heard and seen stories of businesses that are reported for failure to comply, either from customers, or an employee might blow the whistle, or it's otherwise known. The penalty, it could run the gamut. I mean, there's monetary fines, but I think the most important thing that you want to be aware of is, and biggest risk, especially if you're customer facing and have an actual retail or restaurant, et cetera, that's open, is the risk that you could be shut down in the interim until you come to compliance. So you'll want to think about those things. Again, the penalties really could vary in terms of monetary, but what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing a lot of is businesses being forced to shut down for an interim period, or otherwise, taking steps to ameliorate before they're allowed to reopen. And aside from the immediate monetary fine, I think that can have the greatest impact on your business and bottom line.
I see a question here in the chat. It's very specific to a certain situation, so I'm happy to talk to the person who asked it offline, and I will reach out to you after the presentation is over.
Okay. If we want to go to the last slide. Again, we'll provide this PowerPoint to folks after, so you'll be able to access various links. My employer, Gusto, we have a great guide for California employees, benefits during COVID, how that works, an ongoing and updated resource around relief resources and funding for small businesses to weather the storm. The California tiered reopening map, although as we talked about currently, the overlay to that is the regional stay-at-home order. But once that's lifted, again, it's working through the various tiers, with purple being the highest. Links to county-specific reopening guides, lots of great resources in there that are also industry-specific, with a lot of great checklists and forms that you can easily use. Littler Mendelson, which is a national labor defense firm, has a really great resource on reopening across America that I would plug there. For California, is an employer playbook for safe reopening, CDC guidance that's specific for how you can prepare your small business. The state of California has some other resources around the roadmap to recovery, including a tool. That's a really great initial resource to see what activities are permitted or not per county. And then the LA Times also has a great county by county reopening tier as well. So definitely encourage you to spend some time with these resources.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for volunteering to present today. Thank you for all the time and energy that you've spent preparing this presentation and giving it. Are there any other questions before we close out?
Will you be sending us the links for the resources to our emails?
Yes, yes. We'll be sending a copy of the slides that contain all the links to the resources.
Okay.
And also we'll be sending around a link, if you haven't already, a link to apply for individual legal advising for your small business through Legal Services for Entrepreneurs. And then if you haven't already, I would also recommend checking out Meta's website at medasf.org, and we'll send around the link to that as well.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Tobias.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Meta, and thank you, Edwin.
Okay.
Thank you
Take care.
to everyone who attended. Take care. Bye-bye.